When the Lord began to speak by Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry, for the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord." Do you mean that God might actually have one of his servants to marry a woman who was known for harlotry? How could a God of love and of grace do such a thing to one of his servants? Why not get out your Bible? Maybe join me in a cup of coffee. Let's look at it together in today's Bible class.
Give me the Bible, holy message shining. Thy light shall guide me in the narrow way. Precept and promise, law and love combining, till night shall vanish in eternal day.
Our reading for this time begins with the first verse of the first chapter of the book of Hosea. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. When the Lord began to speak by Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go, take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry, for the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord." So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Then the Lord said to him, "Call his name Jezreel, for in a little while I will avenge the blood of Jezreel on the house of Jehu, and bring an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And it shall come to pass in that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." And she conceived again and bore a daughter. Then God said to him, "Call her name Leruhamah, for I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. Yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah, will save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by bow, nor by sword, or battle, by horses or horsemen." Now, when she had weaned Leruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. Then God said, "Call his name Lo-Ami, for you are not my people, and I will not be your God. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, 'You are not my people,' there shall it be said to them, 'You are the sons of the living God.' Then the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and appoint for themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel." The book of Hosea, chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. May God bless the reading of his word. The kingdom called Israel, the northern portion of God's divided people. But though they were divided, God still loved them. He loved the people of Israel just as he loved the people of that southern kingdom called Judah. But the people of the north, they had abandoned him. They had forsook the covenant that they had with him to seek after the gods of the nations round about them, to embrace the false worship that had been introduced by Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, embracing his golden calves, his illicit altars, his pretense priesthood. They had abandoned God, seeking the favors and seeking the acceptance of the people round about them. But even though they had abandoned God, and even though they had forsaken him, even though they had humiliated him, as it were, God still loved them. And God wanted them to understand where their blessings truly came from, who it was who would truly provide for them and protect them. He would try to get them to come back to him. He would send them prophets, men like Elijah, that firebrand who showed the whole nation that the God of heaven was indeed the God and the only God who exists. He was followed up by Elisha, just as powerful, had a double portion of Elijah's spirit, but a little more low key. Someone who was able to move among the people more and to teach and to motivate and to try to lead back to God. Men like Amos, who was a keeper of sheep, one of the herdsmen of Tekoa, a hewer of sycamore trees, one who never intended to be a prophet. And yet God chose him to speak the truth of his word, even in the king's veil, even though he had been ordered to leave. He would preach without hesitation. He would preach without fear. And even the prophet Micaiah, we only read about him once. The final prophet to speak to Ahab, he who Elijah had to contend with. As Micaiah told him that if he indeed continued with his plan to take back Ramoth Gilead, he would die there. Ahab didn't believe him, but Micaiah was right. God had sent them prophets. God had those prophets to write messages. God tried everything possible to get his word known to them. God blessed them to show where it was their blessings truly came from and how much greater his blessings were than any blessings anybody else could produce. He also withdrew his blessings from them, that they might learn the consequences of their actions. It seemed like God had done everything that was conceivable to convince the people to come home. Now, I don't claim to think like God, and I don't claim that God thought this way. But in my own human mind, one of the things I might think was, well, if I could only show them. If I could only put it down on their level and let them see what it's like for one person to love another person and to love them dearly, and to have that person betray them, to have that person humiliate them, to have that person, in this case a husband and a wife, to have her commit adultery against him, to violate the very covenant that makes them one. And then to see how much that man still loves that woman, willing to pay whatever price is necessary to win her back and to bring her back where she's safe and where she's home and where she's loved. You know, if you're going to try something like that, I guess the first question that would come up is, who could that be? What kind of man could show this kind of demonstration, could be this object lesson, as it's often called, of God's great love and God's great willingness to forgive? Well, first and foremost, he'd have to be someone who is righteous, because it wouldn't show any kind of lesson to rebellious Israel if the wife is running away from an evil and a wicked husband. It doesn't illustrate a rebellious Israel abandoning, betraying, committing adultery against a righteous God. So he's got to be a righteous man and upright. Secondly, he's going to have to be a loving man, because part of what's being shown here is God's love toward Israel. This is going to have to be a man who will truly, genuinely love this wife. And when she betrays him, it is something that's going to cut him to the heart. And he will continue to love her, not giving in to bitterness, not giving in to wrath. He will continue to love her so much that he'll pay whatever price is necessary to win her back, which means more than anything else, he's going to have to be a forgiving man. One who is going to be willing to forgive the humiliation, forgive the betrayal, forgive the crimes that she has committed against him. But the question that brings up, of course, is, but where in the world is God going to find a man like that? But praise be to God, he did find one. He found it in the man named Hosea. As we begin now our examination of the text of the book of Hosea, we note verse 2 of chapter 1 begins in an interesting way. When the Lord began to speak by Hosea. Now, if you're like me, a lot of you who are older, we grew up reading this and studying this and understanding it based on the wording of the King James Version, which reads, the beginning of the word of the Lord by Hosea, which I had always taken to mean that's just the beginning of the book. This is an introduction. This is the work of the Lord. This is the word of the Lord preached by Hosea. But you know, the wording, the way it's stated in the New King James, it seems to be a little bit different. When the Lord began to speak by Hosea. If you compare it to the wording of the American Standard Version of 1901, still considered by many scholars to be the most technically accurate translation of the Greek, when Jehovah spake at the first by Hosea, or the English Standard Version, when the Lord first spoke through Hosea, or the Holcomb Christian Standard Bible, another one that tries its best to translate rather than commentate. It says, when the Lord first spoke to Hosea. Now it looks to me that from those other versions, instead of this being an introduction to the book, it's letting us know the call of Hosea to be a prophet. This is the first message that God would give to Hosea. Pulling up the Hebrew interlinear, leaving out the Hebrew here, began to speak, and the symbols you see there are the Hebrew writing for God, for the name of God, began to speak God, we'll say, by Hosea. Again, that idea that what we have here is not just this is the beginning of the book, but rather this is the very first thing that God would say to Hosea as he calls Hosea to be his spokesman and to be his prophet. And we continue now into verse 2, continue on. When the Lord began to speak by Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, and can you imagine? Can you imagine what Hosea might be thinking, that he's being called to go speak to the children of Israel? He's being commissioned by God to go tell my children, or to go to the king and inform him as others had done before him. But interestingly enough, I'd have to say Hosea has the most unusual calling of a prophet, because the very first thing that God tells him to do as he calls him as a prophet is go take for yourself a wife. Now, I've known a lot of young preachers graduating from schools of preaching and from Christian colleges who were advised one of the smartest things they could do, or some of the best advice they could get, is to find a good wife. Don't wait. Go ahead now and find a good wife. Because, and there's no doubt it's true, a good faithful helpmeet, a good helpful soulmate, a good helpful partner who loves God and wants to serve God and wants to seek God's will just as much as you do, can be an immeasurable asset to one who is seeking to do the will of God. But that's not the advice that Hosea is getting here. Matter of fact, it's not the commandment, the instruction. Go take yourself a wife, but God has in mind a particular kind of woman that he would have Hosea to marry. You go take for yourself a wife of harlotry. Harlotry, the sin of prostitution, where a person takes one of the most private and one of the most precious things that they have, something that is to be exchanged only in a loving covenant relationship between one man and one woman in marriage. They turn it into nothing more than a business commodity, something to be given in exchange for money or for other types of favor. This is the type of woman that God has called Hosea to take as his wife, as he calls him to be a prophet. And can you imagine his reaction? We just talked about the fact that a faithful wife who loves God, who seeks God's will, can be an immeasurable asset to a man who's seeking to serve God. But can you imagine the liability this type of woman would be? How people would look at him, especially if Hosea is going to be trying to present God's message, a message of righteousness and purity, and how they will look at him and his wife. This is a thing that would be very dimly, very poorly looked upon. In the New Testament, we read in the book of Luke, chapter 7, about a time our Lord Jesus Christ was invited to the house of Simon, a Pharisee. And as Jesus reclined at the table, a woman came in who is identified only as a sinner. She anoints Jesus' feet with a cruse of oil. She washes his feet with the tears that fall from her eyes, and she dries his feet, dries those tears with the hairs of her head. Simon, as he looks at this, is filled with indignation. He says, verse 39, this man, if he were a prophet, would know who and what manner of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner. How is it that people would look at this situation of a man who would claim to be a prophet of God, but would take as his wife a prostitute, a woman of harlotry? It beggars the imagination. But that's not all that God has told him. Not only go take for yourself a wife of harlotry, he tells Hosea, you take children of harlotry. It has been argued, it's been debated whether or not these would be children that his wife had already had, the products of her prostitution that she had, that Hosea was to take them in as well as her, raise them as his own. One of the indications here is that Hosea might be a fellow, though not rich, comfortably well-to-do, that he can take on a wife and children so abruptly and so suddenly. Others have thought that, well, it may not be her children, but it may be other children who came about the same way. They are the products of other women's prostitution. They have no home. They have no father. And Hosea has been called to take them in and to provide for them. And that wouldn't be viewed any better than taking in a wife of harlotry. Those children, in the eyes of society around them, would be tainted. They would be marked. They would be considered stained with their parents' sin. And the only reason that God gives him for doing this is for the land has committed great harlotry by departing from the Lord. Now, our reaction to that might well be, Lord, you can't seriously be asking me to do this. Lord, you can't be calling upon me to do this to myself, to ruin my reputation, to ruin my influence, to harm my ability to be a spokesman for you by taking on such a wife, by taking on such children. That might well be our reaction. But it doesn't appear to have been Hosea, because verse 3 says he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim. Now, it could be, of course, just the great economy of the Bible. It's not going to waste time talking about things that are not pertinent to the lesson being taught. But it is worthy of note. There is no indication given of Hosea ever arguing, ever complaining, ever doubting, ever being reluctant. The Lord told him to go take yourself a wife of harlotry. Verse 3, he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim. No matter how this arrangement, no matter how this marriage would look in the eyes of men, it seems that God will at least bless it in the fact that she will conceive and will bear a son. And how beautiful it is in a marriage when a child born of the union of man and woman, especially a child born because that union is one of love, when a child is born. But God's not finished in the work that he would have Hosea to do, or in the work that his family are going to be called to do, whether voluntarily or not. Because we're told in verse 4, the Lord said to him, call his name Jezreel. God has decided what the name of this son would be, and the name that's given to him is a very significant name in the annals and the history of Israel. Jezreel, the word in Hebrew, means God sows. And perhaps they would take that as the idea that God is now sowing goodness. God is planting seed for Hosea because he has been so willing to submit himself, to yield himself to the will of God. But he goes on to give the reason why he's to call his name Jezreel. For in a little while I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu. Say, what now? We're going to call his name God sows, because in a little while I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu. And here we have the first of the prophecies that Hosea is going to be preaching. As every time he introduces his son, this name Jezreel, and they may ask him, why would you give him such a name? because in a little while God is going to avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu. And you say, I don't understand. What are you talking about? Well, Jezreel was a very significant place in the history of Israel. Jezreel was the city that Ahab, you may remember him of Jezebel fame, it's where he made the capital, as it was, of this northern kingdom of Israel during his time as king. The valley of Jezreel was a prominent trade route. Traders coming down from Assyria, coming down the way of Mount Carmel, that route being the most advantageous, the easiest to travel, that would be where the roads were, would find easy travel through the valley of Jezreel down to the Jordan River. Very prominent route. But that's not why Jezreel stands out in the history of Israel. The son of Ahab, Joram. Ahab had died in battle, died because of a ill-advised attempt to take back the city of Ramoth Gilead. He died in that battle. His son Joram was made king. And Joram, just as foolhardy as his father, sought to take on in battle the armies of Syria. He lost. He was sorely injured. And he went to Jezreel, and there he sought to heal from his wounds. But while at Jezreel, Jehu, a man anointed by Elisha the prophet to be king over the northern kingdom of Israel, but unlike David and some others, is unwilling to wait until God's judgment is going to be taken. Jehu rides immediately to Jezreel, gathering people as he goes. And in 1 Kings chapter 9, verses 12 through 26, we read how he slays the wounded King Joram, that he might take for himself the throne of the kingdom of Israel. And his bloodshed didn't stop there. In that same chapter, picking up with verse 27, the king of Judah, his name was Ahaziah. He was the brother-in-law of Joram. And he's come up to see how Joram is doing. He's come to visit him as he recovers. Well, while he's there, Jehu attempts to slay him. This is verses 27 through 29 of 1 Kings 9. He is severely wounded. He does flee back to his land. He does succumb to those wounds, but that's a story for another time. Jehu is not satisfied here. Ahab's other sons, as we move to the next chapter, chapter 10, verses 1 through 11. Ahab has other sons that he demands their heads. He demands their heads of the city that they're in, lest he come and attack the city. So all of Ahab's other sons are slain. And not only that, when the brothers of Ahaziah, the king of Judah, come to pay their regards to the new king of Israel, he slays them. This is chapter 10, verses 12 through 14. And this is just a portion of the blood that Jehu would shed, most of this being done in and around the area of Jezreel. He was indeed a bloodthirsty and a blood-dipped man. Call his name Jezreel. For in a little while I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu. And it shall come to pass in that day, I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. So again, the first of the prophecies that Hosea would be preaching to the people. Every time that he would mention his son, perhaps his son being there for people to see, every time his name was called, Hosea would tell the people, I have named him Jezreel because God says he's going to avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu. And it will come to pass in that day, I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. But the work that Hosea has to do in preaching and prophesying is not done yet, nor is the involvement of his family, nor has it come to an end. We move to verse 6. She conceived again and bore a daughter. You know, time tends to go by. Even if the future has been foretold, even if there's a prophecy that has been made, time still goes on, and the events that happen are going to continue to happen. And so Gomer conceives again, and this time bears a daughter. And God has a name picked out for her. Call her name La Ruhamah. I love the way it just rolls off the tongue. It is a beautiful name, Leruhamah. But in Hebrew it means no mercy, no pity, no charity, no compassion. It's a hard name. We've known people who've named their daughters Mercy, some who've named their daughters Charity. Can you imagine naming your daughter No Mercy, no charity, no pity? This child is going to live with this name. This is what she's going to be known by. And there is a reason that God would have her to be named Leruhamah. And this is the second of the prophecies that Hosea is given to preach. For I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. And so again, we have another child who will be the opportunity for Hosea to speak to anyone who will listen, especially the first time they meet her. Leruhamah, no mercy. Why would you name a child that? Because God said, I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. This is the message of Hosea, a message that is going to be born on her daughter, who she will also be asked, why did they name you this? This is the answer that she will have to give, because God said, I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. But the prophecy does not end there. Not only is her name indicative of the fact that the house of Israel, because of their betrayal, because of their harlotry with the gods and the nations round about them, not only will they no longer receive mercy, but you go on reading verse 7, yet I will have mercy on the house of Judah. Israel has squandered God's mercy, and God's mercy is not going to be given anymore. But the house of Judah, their brethren across that imaginary line that separates Israel from Judah, they will still be the recipients of God's mercy. God goes on to say, I will save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by bow, nor by sword, or battle, by horses or horsemen. And indeed, that is the case. After the fall of the nation of Israel to the Assyrians, Assyria would turn her attention to that southern kingdom of Judah, and they would indeed conquer the cities round about. But when they came to Jerusalem, and it looked a very dire situation, Jerusalem was hemmed in. The city was facing starvation, and yet it wasn't by battle. It wasn't by bow or swordsman or any weapon of man. That night, by the direct intervention of God, the army of Assyria was decimated. It was annihilated, and they fled back in disgrace. They fled back in defeat. God would save them when he would not save Israel because of Israel's sin. But I will have mercy on the house of Judah. And yet the message isn't done yet. Hosea's work and the work of his children is not done yet. Verse 8, when she had weaned Leruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. Time is still going by. These prophecies have not yet been fulfilled. Time continues, and the events between men and women and the daily events of the world still go on. And so Leruhamah has grown to a point, she's been weaned, and now they're going to be blessed with another son. And again, God has a name to give to him. And in many ways, I think this may be the most tragic of all. Then God said, call his name Loami. Loami. In Hebrew, it means not my people. Now, I don't know about as a young boy, but as he reaches his teenage years, you know exactly what he's going to hear. He's going to hear, not mine. Can you imagine naming your son? Giving him a name that means he's not mine. Yes, remember, his wife is a prostitute. She is of harlotry. She will be unfaithful if she's not been, and some have speculated that these children were not children sired, these last two were not children sired by Hosea. And they think that he has literally named his son, he's not mine. The reason that God has given him to name his child such as this, to put such a burden on this young man, well, you are not my people, and I will not be your God. Again, the opportunity to preach. When he introduces his son, when anyone talks about this is Hosea, the prophet of God, and this is his son, Loami, and they look, Loami? Why would you name your son Loami? Because God has said, you are not my people, and I will not be your God. And notice that last part. I will not be your God. There are many who have claimed to be God's people, but claiming it does not make it so. What was it Jesus had to say on the Sermon on the Mount? Many shall say unto me that day, Lord, Lord, have we not in thy name prophesied, and in thy name cast out demons, and in thy name done many mighty works? And what will be the answer of the Lord? Depart from me. I never knew you. You may claim that you're my people, but I am not your God. You are not obedient to me. You are not doing my will. You are not faithful to me. You are not my people, no matter what you claim. And I will not be your God. But then in verse 10, things change. The whole attitude changes. With the birth of the children and the prophecies that have been given, Jezreel, that God is going to execute judgment on the house of Jehu. He's going to avenge all that blood, and he will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Leruhamah, I will no longer have mercy on you. I will have mercy on the nation of Judah, but I will no longer have mercy on you. Loami, you're not my people anymore. I disown you. You are not my people no matter what you claim. But we get to verse 10. And the prophecy continues. This is the prophecy from Loami. I am not your people. You are not my people. I am not your God yet. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. Yes, God says, I am not your God. I am not going to have mercy on you, but the people will not be totally destroyed. They will not be totally wiped out of existence. And a time will come when the number of the children of Israel, they'll be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And that could hold true while they're in the nation of Assyria. Later, when the people come back, it's only a small number, mostly from the nation of Judah who returned back out of Babylon. They spread out. They are a multitudinous people. They are a large people who were scattered out throughout the Assyrian and later the Babylonian Empire. No, God has not abandoned them to the point that he would destroy them utterly. The children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And perhaps as we look down the corridor of time and see the ultimate fulfillment of God's people, the church, those who would wear the name of Jesus, yes, their number truly will be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. As they spread across the face of the earth, God will not totally abandon his people, not until that final day when judgment is cast. And so he goes on, the latter part of verse 10. It shall come to pass, in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there it shall be said to them, you are the sons of the living God. When a people repent, when they come back to God, when they offer themselves back in submission and in obedience to submit themselves to God's will, it will be said to them, you are the sons of the living God. That's the promise that we have as Christians, that we are the sons of the living God. We are the children of God when we submit to him and we do his will. Picking up now with verse 11, the last verse of the chapter. Then the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together. This Prophecy will be fulfilled after the fall of the southern nation of Judah to the kingdom of Babylon, those who would succeed Assyria. And after they're carried off into 70 years of captivity under Cyrus, the king of Persia, the people would be allowed to come home, and all of those of whatever tribe, of whichever nation, of Israel or Judah, who chose to, were allowed to come home. And they would point for themselves one head. That would be Zerubbabel, who would be the leader who would initially lead them back and serve as governor over the land in their first return. But I think possibly it may see its final and complete fulfillment again in the church, when all the people of God are gathered together having one head. In John chapter 6 and John chapter 10, verse 16, Jesus talks about how there will be that passage of the Good Shepherd. There will be one flock and one shepherd. The church only has one head, and that head is Jesus Christ. And those who would be the people of God, to fulfill this property, we've got to gather together, not under the rule of men and not under the names of men, but we need to appoint one head, the head that God has selected, the man, Jesus Christ. The children of Israel, the children of Judah, the children of Israel shall be gathered together and appoint for themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. And with that, we conclude chapter 1 of the book of Hosea. If you would be interested in increasing your own knowledge of the Bible, we have several resources that we would be happy to make available to you without charge and without obligation. Whether it's an in-home Bible study, or a digital or online Bible study, or a correspondence course, a study by mail. If you'd be interested in any of these ways of studying, please contact us at Bible Class, 4255 Gore Subligna Road, Somerville, Georgia 30747, or email us at todaysbibleclass@gmail.com. You can also leave a text message at 706-290-4329. In the second chapter of Hosea, in the first 13 verses, charges are made and judgments are reached. Are they against Gomer, the wife of Hosea? Are they against the nation of Israel? Or are they against both? Bring along a Bible. Maybe join me in a cup of coffee. Let's find out together the next time that we meet in Bible class.